All right. Well, we just had a great podcast. Tessa Virtue.
You're so good. You're such a natural. You make it feel like a real conversation, and at no point did I feel like I was being interviewed.
That is so sweet. I love how this is just about...
No, that's rare.
That's very sweet, Tessa. We had a great talk. I think we got a lot of good stuff here that maybe you might not have shared on other podcasts.
Oh no, this is where I want to share things.
Oh, okay.
This is where it's at.
So you guys are going to hear a lot of new things you might not have heard from Tessa. we go really deep here. I feel like this was a good one. So thank you for opening up and sharing everything you shared. And I cannot wait for our followers to listen. Well, welcome Tessa Virtue to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to have you on here. It honestly is truly an honor. You are a 3-time Olympic championship, 5-time Olympic medalist, and you and Scott Moyer are the most celebrated, famous ice dance pair in history. Did I get that right?
You rocked it. You didn't
okay,
even look at
I
your
have
notes.
the notes
No,
next
you
to
didn't
me,
even
and I
look.
really didn't want to screw that up. When you hear that, is that like, because I know now you have sort of a different path and you've retired from ice dancing, which we're going to talk about, but does that feel weird when you hear that?
A little bit. It sort of feels like, who is that?
Right.
I don't know. I feel like it's a different person. It's odd how quickly you can dissociate from that. Although I will say with more time and perspective, I'm able to look back at our career and feel a bit differently. I'm able to sort of appreciate those successes. When you're in it, you're just thinking, oh, I could have been better, or, you know, what's next? And when, I don't know, I just think it's been nice to have a bit of time and space away.
Right. A bit of perspective.
I think so, yeah.
Well, and you also started at such a young age, which maybe you can talk about how you got into it, where you started. Was it something that, you know, when you did it, you were like, this is it, I'm going to the Olympics? And I find this so fascinating. And I know we kind of spoke about this when we originally met. One of my kids is in a competitive sport. And so many of our listeners are parents, are moms who have children in competitive sports. So I think that angle is something that our listeners are very interested in is, you know, where was sort of the passion there, and, you know, also that kind of pressure at such a young age, how you dealt with that. That was a lot of questions in one. So maybe let's start with how you first started.
Sure. I just, what struck me was you said that you sort of followed your brother to, you know, the rink or this and that, and needed to kind of carve your own path.
Totally.
Is that fair?
I was, yeah. I mean, I guess I was, we spoke about this, you know, my brother was the athlete. And so my parents really invested so much of their time in him. And because of that, I sort of followed along. Like you said, yeah, I was at the rink every weekend. We went on hockey trips with him. And I don't want to feel like, you know, I sacrificed something, because I think they were always like, you know, you're not amazing at one thing, but you're good at a lot of things and you can sort of handle yourself. So in a way, I think it made me more independent. And certainly at 13, 14, when you're traveling with a group of hockey players, that's, you know, that was fun. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting being involved in a family where one member of that family is in a competitive sport.
Right. And I think it's, I got thinking about that because my mom, I have 2 older brothers and an older sister, and my mom really wanted to make sure that my sister and I weren't traipsed around to the rink and, you know, to football practices and to the baseball diamond. So she really wanted to expose us to a lot of different activities. But it is interesting how with, you know, siblings, you end up with your roles. Like you said, you weren't the athlete in the family. And it's funny how, I mean, I was the least athletic, I think, of my family, but pretty quickly I adopted that role and probably internalized it in a way. But I started skating when I was 6. In grade 1, my class was going on a field trip and I really wanted to be able to skate with them. So my grandma, both my parents worked full time, and I spent a lot of time with my grandma growing up. And so she drove me to skating lessons. And at that time I was doing gymnastics and soccer, and I was dancing a lot. And she said to the coach immediately, this is just the thing she does for fun. No tests, no competitions. This is just her outlet for fun. And that didn't last long because I was paired with Scott when I was 7. Then he was 9.
Crazy. And was it like an instant love for the sport? Because you said, and again, like just going back to, I feel like what so many parents do, it's like they stick their kids in so many different sports and they want to see what sticks. Was the love for it like there right away? Or was it more like, I'm paired with him and I'm doing this more? And was it more just sort of out of the routine of it versus like an instant love for skating?
In a way, I don't think I started to really love skating until the last 2 years of our career. So about 2 decades in.
Wow.
But there was something that I clearly latched onto, and that I loved to dance. I loved choreography. I loved movement. And I was very competitive. So it didn't take me long to realize that ice dance could really be that perfect marriage of the two. And there was also something about being part of a team. I liked being accountable to someone and building something with someone. And even when we were pretty young, once we started talking, probably a few years later, I think we really fed off of one another, and we learned to find joy in the collaboration because we're so, so different, and learning how to come together to work towards, a shared vision or common goals. That was very fulfilling.
Right. And did you kind of sense that? I mean, obviously you were so young, but did you sense that chemistry immediately where you're like, this is easy, we just click? It's like you didn't even have to work on it.
No. In fact, we worked really hard on it.
On the chemistry.
I don't know about the chemistry, maybe what people see or saw as chemistry. But I remember being 8 and 10 sitting with one of our coaches who had done a lot of psychology studying, and she talked to us about how we communicate with each other, how we cultivate this code of respect, how our words impact one another, how we can, maximize our time on the ice to work towards a goal. Like even at a very young age, we prioritized the partnership. But you can imagine starting at 7 and then retiring somewhere around 30. We just went through so many different life stages. So no, I don't think that chemistry came easily. And I don't even really think we showed a lot of potential early on. But there was something that seemed to click within us. And maybe that's because we both recognized something in the other that could be untapped or explored as far as potential. And that got addicting. Like, what is our potential and how do we really optimize it?
Right. So that drive with the partnership, because it's so interesting, I think, a solo sport versus a team sport, and having a partner. And like you said, having that accountability and that other person to give you that drive, because I don't know if you'd ever explored solo ice skating, or if that was just never really on the table and it was always with a partner that was sort of like what interested you and where your drive was.
Yeah, I skated on my own for a little while, and so did Scott, but that was not interesting really to either of us. And he loved skating so much that he almost loved it enough for the two of us. And I think maybe the balance was that we could offer each other sort of
different things.
Different strengths and different perspectives on it. And he's so passionate that when he starts moving to music, it's impossible to not, feel something when you're right there alongside him. So I do think that probably was a driving force for a while.
And how did you find that balance? I think one of the things when I first met you that we spoke about, which is such a big thing for me, is, as a parent, like when do you know to sort of, and maybe you never really know this, but to kind of keep pushing if you see that there is a talent there, or if your child is just like, I want to be done, to say, you know what, move on. Because in that circumstance, years later, you never want them to look back and feel like, I regret not pursuing this. Why didn't you push me? So I feel like it's such a push-pull as a parent. And I don't know if you had times where you felt like, I want to quit, I'm not doing this. If you put pressure on yourself, if your family did, like kind of where did the drive come from? And did you ever feel like, I'm done with this?
Well, I can't answer this as a parent, but I've thought of a lot about it from, the athlete's perspective. And you're right, that's so tricky. And I don't envy parents, especially in those early years when it's the parent's decision, really, let's be honest, when you're making those choices. And it's hard to know. And I think partly there has to be the separation between what are the goals of the parent and what do they want for their child, and what lessons and experiences do they want to get from sport? Because there are so many beautiful things that can come from sport, whether that's, this sense of resilience, goal setting, teamwork. I mean, there are so many great things so many good lessons that can be absorbed, but that has to be if that's the purpose, then those values need to be pretty clear.
Right.
Because those can come, in intramural. And
right. You don't have to go competitive.
Recreational sport.
Right.
And so I think this idea that athletes can be manufactured, that children can be made into these superstars, is a bit frightening.
Yeah.
And so that distinction between what the goals are of the parent and really what the child wants. And I think there's a lot of power in being exposed to different activities and not being so singularly focused on one sport young.
Right.
And that is difficult. I think there's also something to reading the cues of your child. My sister did competitive gymnastics for a really long time, and she was very, very good. She went and trained with the Hungarian national team, and she was, doing incredible things. And at one point, my mom was convinced that she was gaining self-esteem because there she was improving and learning a skill and getting rewarded for that. And, that was really bolstering this sense of confidence. But she noticed my sister wasn't smiling.
Right.
And so if you're observant and aware of the cues that your child is also giving you, whether they're able to articulate that or not, I think my sister can look back now and realize, oh yeah, I had a lot of anxiety around the fact that I was at the gym 30 hours a week when I was 8.
Right.
So it's really tough to know.
Yeah.
It's hard to know.
But I think that's great advice. And I think I even saw that with my brother, who was in competitive hockey, where it was he loved it and loved it. And then he had to make a choice, if he was going to continue on after high school and go pro. And a lot of his friends, ended up in the NHL. And he's like, I don't love it that much. And I think his personality with the pressure maybe was just too much. And I think that kind of pressure is, listen, not everybody can handle being at a certain level, right?
Right. And I think that drive needs to come from a very an internal, intrinsic place. It can't be pushed. And in fact, often what I've seen is when parents do push too hard, that's when the kids lose the love of it.
Yeah.
And that delicate balance is one thing, but I think the more you can empower your children to carve their own path or understand kind of what they're pursuing. And maybe the question is, if you don't make it to the NHL or if you don't reach the podium at the Olympics, is this still worth it? And are these sacrifices worth it?
Right.
And is there something to be gained? Is it a scholarship? Is it part of an education? Is it, the team experience, travel, whatever it is?
Right.
What are you gaining?
What else are you getting out of it?
So many good things.
100%. Well, and I'm sure you can say what those things were. There were obviously, like you said, negatives and positives to starting at such a young age and, being in the Olympics at a young age. What do you feel were some of the biggest successes that set you up, especially now you're in a totally different career? What were some of those things that you're I'm so grateful for XYZ that set me up for success later in life?
That's such a good question. I think part of that is the recipe for success.
Right.
So it's knowing that I can set a goal and work tirelessly to achieve it. And there's some confidence that comes in, not that I would ever feel entitled to something, but that I know I'll work for it.
Right.
And I also feel we were so lucky. We got to work with some of the best experts in so many different domains. So we worked with mental prep coaches and sports psychologists and even marriage counselors. And those lessons really built this kind of sense of being gritty and resilience. And I now know that I can reframe a situation and turn it into a positive. I know that when I walk into a major presentation, I can control the self-talk in my mind. I know that I can, embrace failure as growth. So there are a lot of, it's amazing the parallels between sport and business, and exploring those has been just so fun.
Well, and I think that's such a big thing is the mental, the mental prep and the mental health around being in a sport, having all eyes on you, being a girl, going to the Olympics, like what, and I know you kind of talked about the mental prep with, psychologists and things like that. How did you handle your mental health? Because obviously, you can have all the therapists, all the things, but it's still on you. It's still all that pressure. What did you do to mitigate it? Was it Scott? Was it you? Was it your family? Did it get better with age?
It certainly improved later in our career. And I think there was a real shift. I think I lost myself totally around the 2014 Olympics. We were trying to appease so many people and so many of the wrong people that we didn't really have our defined identity on the ice or purpose. And I was really injured for, a good chunk of my career with a chronic leg injury. And so I think I lost my voice and being able to articulate the pain, first of all, but also what I needed from the people around me. And that would ebb and flow with Scott. And it was so nice to always have that kind of constant source of support, but that needs to be reciprocated at different times. So I think leading into the 2018 Olympics, oh my gosh, 2018 suddenly seems so far away. I said that?
It seems so far, but not so far. But I feel like COVID literally separated 2018 and now with a lifetime of time? Years.
Yes, what is time? In the lead up to that, I think we realized that we couldn't pursue any kind of sustained high performance and sacrifice our well-being.
Right.
We just couldn't do the two, and it couldn't come at a cost because we needed to feel like we could thrive and flourish mentally in order to perform. So we made a lot of shifts to our training. And one of the biggest things from a mindset standpoint, in addition to embracing rest and recovery differently, we also decided to really chase excellence instead of perfection. And that was a huge weight off of our shoulders because perfection was never going to be attainable in our sport. And yet that's what we were always seeking. That was the benchmark. And it prevented us from ever celebrating the small wins along the way. And that was a real barrier. And so I felt like when we changed that to chasing excellence instead, we could step on the ice and be much more uninhibited and, skate without hesitation.
Well, and that's probably in the beginning of the conversation when I asked you about, skating and your love for it and when did it start? You said the last 2 years of your career. So obviously that's tied to you just kind of letting go of this idea of what you had to be and performing for yourselves.
Yes. Letting go and also taking control.
Right.
I think feeling the autonomy and acting with agency was the most empowering feeling of our career. And I think that made us much better athletes, but it's hard to rush that,
No, I don't think that's something you're going to realize when you're, how were you 20 when you won your first? Yeah. So, and you started at such a young age. So I feel like that kind of perspective obviously comes with years of figuring that out.
Yeah. And it's never going to be, I think at that level of performance, it's never going to be comfortable.
Right.
I felt really physically uneasy and almost ill because of the pressure and the nerves.
Yeah.
And at one point we had to realize that wasn't going away.
Right.
So what were the strategies and the tools we could employ that would help make us feel comfortable within that? And that too, it's when people talk about being fearless, and I love that notion, but it's not about not having the fear. It's just about acknowledging it and doing
embracing
it anyways.
Yeah, embracing it because it's going to be there, trying not to push it away. You would be a great mindset coach for children in sports.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll start with your daughter.
I was going to say, are you actually available later today? Because it's true. Like she's definitely had moments like literally in the middle of her freestyle where she'll have this crazy mental block and like not be able to go. And I know so many kids are like that, kids, adults, but you know, it's just interesting as, you know, for children that, you know, all that pressure and how to deal with it and kind of use it to their advantage versus, you know, pushing it deep down or, you know, kind of like you said.
And it's really interesting. I do think there's some positive intervention that can happen with kids because so many of those things that you're talking about, you know, that resilience, the mindset, the focus.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the stuff that we teach CEOs or executive leaders.
Right.
And we sometimes think of resilience, for example, as this abstract thing you either have or you don't. But in fact, it was either you were taught it or you weren't.
Right.
And there are skills that can be honed. And I think that is really emboldening too.
100%. That's literally the goal of every parent. It's like, what do you want your kid to be? And every parent is like, how do I teach my kid resilience? Especially now where they're so coddled and, you know, parents are really on them about everything. And, you know, that is the goal is how do I, you know, kind of like let my kids go into the world and let them be able to handle themselves and not crumble and function as an adult.
I know, but I do
a lot of pressure.
Well, I understand also wanting to bubble wrap your kids. Like it's hard to watch them fail and fall and falter. But I do think that's important because they need to feel like they're equipped with the skills to handle it.
Right. Because they are going to fail.
They are.
They're going to fall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And better to do that young and feel like, oh, I can overcome this.
Totally.
Than get to be 18, 19, move out of the house and then get hit really hard.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it's the same with anything with children with, you know, I don't like this kid in my class or you know, and it's like, well, you got to deal with it. And maybe we can talk a bit about your relationship with Scott. I mean, I know there was so much kind of talk surrounding that. Was there ever anything between you guys or was it strictly platonic?
It's an interesting thing to try and define or label. It was platonic.
Right.
Sorry, I'll start there. It was platonic and we were best friends and business partners.
Right.
And we spent so much time together.
Right.
Like, you know, an inordinate amount of time, probably 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year for 22 years. So, and traveling. And we were always together. There was a fear, I think, that especially when we got to a certain level, that would have been a real risk.
100%.
You know,
when you're 7 is one thing, but when you're 14, 15, 16.
Yeah. And I think then it just got to be, we had so much respect for one another and really cared about that dynamic that we had and have. And we just protected that with everything we had and worked so hard on it. But I understand the complication in trying to put that in a box or categorize what that partnership was. And that's just inevitable, especially with the stories that we were portraying on the ice.
Totally. When I think people saw the chemistry, they probably just really wanted that story, you know? It's like they wanted to hear that.
For sure. And I get that. And then, you know, you do interviews and when you're standing next to each other and someone says, well, what, you don't want to be together? Well, that feels really rude to with him there or with me there for him to look and say, no, I don't want that.
Yeah.
You know, so we were always so sensitive of one another's feelings.
Yeah.
Maybe to an extreme, but I do think that served us in some way.
Right. It protected the relationship.
I think so. And I mean, skating really is what brought us together.
Right.
That was the common goal, the common language. That was our safe space.
Right.
And that always took priority.
Precedence. Yeah. So maybe you could talk to us about what the Olympics was like, what it was like winning gold. Like, what is that feeling? I mean, were you just like, when it happened, were you blown away or were you like, we've worked like, this is like, what was the feeling?
In Vancouver, there was this beautiful innocence about that experience because we were so young. I really didn't even think that anyone outside of the rink, so there were 14,000 people watching, I didn't think anyone else was paying attention. You know, I didn't realize that the magnitude of, you know, what that moment meant to do on home ice at a home Olympic Games. But singing "Oh Canada" with the arena was like the best feeling possible. I just remember being so giddy and so excited and wonderfully naive, you know, in that I think we were able to really take it in. We didn't have sponsors.
Right.
No one really expected us to win.
Right.
So when you're chasing something and you're the underdog and you deliver, I mean, I think we were just so proud of those experiences, but I was also really injured. So at the Vancouver Games, I was getting about 7 hours of physio every day.
Oh, wow.
And so mentally that was hard to reconcile because I was around the best athletes in the whole world in the best shape possible. And I was really struggling to walk to the cafeteria. But we did. And then we had the most fun after those games, going to all of the different events. And Sochi was probably one of the best months of my whole life. And that's funny because people don't often want to talk about it. We've got silver and there was probably this whole media storm around, you know, those particular games.
Right.
And yet it was so fun. Oh my gosh, it was so fun. The team was amazing and we partied so much after, and everything was in close proximity at those games.
Right.
So it just felt like the team was so cohesive and I felt like I was part of something bigger.
And did you feel less pressure because you had already won gold at the Vancouver Olympics, or
More?
You felt more pressure to live up to that?
Yeah, I think, and I do think that messed with us a bit because we felt there was a target. We felt we were defending something. And so such a different feeling.
Right. Versus just going in and saying,
yeah,
we're going to do our best and hopefully, you know, we get a medal.
Right.
Versus we got to go for like the top.
Yeah. And if you're at home, I always picture that random person sitting at home watching the Olympics and you hear, oh, these are the defending Olympic champions. Well, then they should win. And if we don't win for Canada, it felt like it was such a failure.
Right. That's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. Yeah. And I think then we retired after those games. And we got to sit in the stands for a couple of competitions. And I just remember realizing no one cares.
Right.
Like in the best way.
Yeah.
No one cares.
Right.
And we tried to harness that when we went into the Pyeongchang Games, knowing that, yes, people wanted us to have our moment, but they weren't invested.
No.
Or, you know, they didn't care if we came home 10th.
Right.
So that was liberating.
Right. And then after that, did you know in 2018 that you were done after that?
Yes. We were done. And and I think, you know, we were chatting about that question of like, would it be worth it, you know, to make all these sacrifices and to put in the work and this and that. And I can honestly say that even if we came last in Pyeongchang, I mean, this is easy to say now, but I think there would have been great fulfillment in the pursuit of it and in the process. Right. And we knew that we were prepared. We knew that we had done things differently. We had sort of flipped a lot of those orthodoxies that are inherent to skating on their heads, and that felt good. It felt like we were ready to do it in our own way.
Right. You were leaving on a good foot, so to speak, knowing that you'd done it for yourself and not for anybody else.
Yes.
And now you've done a pretty big pivot with your career. So it's so funny because I was chatting with a friend, Jody, and she's like, I just had lunch with Tessa. And I'm like, how do you know Tessa? She's like, well, we work at Deloitte's together. I was like, I had absolutely no idea. So maybe you can share with our listeners what you're doing now and kind of like how, I guess, skating and everything that you've done before sort of feeds into what you're doing now.
Sure. And I feel like we've known each other for 20 years because we have so many mutual friends and so many funny connections.
There's so many connections. And it always starts with Sarah.
Always.
Ryan's girlfriend.
Yes.
Yeah, she's a connector.
She is a connector.
Yes. Oh, there you are with the mic. You need to pipe up.
I know I was going to, but then you were just talking and I was listening.
No, we were just,
I was gazing very longingly into Tess. I was like, sorry, is there anyone else here? All my children are here. My dogs, like it's literally, we wanted to be very pro today.
What was the question we were chatting about?
Deloitte. Yes, it was Deloitte.
Yes,
it was.
I love Jody.
Yeah.
Yes. So as I retired from sport, I quickly launched myself into an MBA, which was kind of always on the docket. I knew that education would be important. And I was approached by Deloitte to help them build a corporate athlete program of sorts. So I signed on as an executive advisor in their human capital department. And I love the work that I get to do because it's all about the integration around high performance and well-being. And how do we unlock the potential of our workforce? A lot of the kind of marginal gains that can be made to show up as your best self at work. And I think that environment is really interesting to me because it's a culture that is innovative and on, leading the charge in Canada, and they're willing to take chances. But they have such a deep rooted history of that workaholic kind of culture. So connecting with Deloitte has been phenomenal, and their clients. And I think I'm starting to see just how all of that, all of my lived experience as an athlete can maybe highlight some of those, like the anecdotes of skating allow people to find sort of like something resonates in the story and then think, okay, how can I apply that to my life?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit what I'm doing in school now, is like the data and the research behind all of that, so that people can have the strategies and the tactical toolkits to be their best.
Yeah. Well, the burnout is real, and I feel like it was definitely glorified. And I was saying I used to do this myself, where it was like, I'm up until 2 a.m. and look at me, I'm sending all these emails at 2 a.m. And it's like, but I'm exhausted. Who am I bragging to? And like, why is this a thing? We should be prioritizing, and not necessarily shorter work weeks, but just, not glorifying this idea of I have to work 7 days a week. I've got to get this done now. I have to respond to an email within 24 hours. You know what? They can wait. Like, it's okay if I don't respond right away. And I think, I used to feel so guilty about that. And now I'm like, it's okay. That can wait.
But that's healthy to have those boundaries.
Yeah.
And was that just with experience that you started to feel more comfortable?
I think I got burnt out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad I had to get there.
Yeah. But I think I know a lot of people in the same place where it's like, they're really into this grind. And now I think more and more, it's like people are taking more time or trying to take more time for themselves and trying not to, glorify this insane work week and burning out. And, it's also the balance. If you've got a family, if you've got kids, if, your point, it's like there are other things outside of work that you need in order to keep you going. So I think it's hard. It's hard to get there, but I think that's, it's amazing that that's something that you focused on, and also take your learning from skating and applying it to that.
Yeah. And I feel lucky to be in a corporate culture like that sees my CV, which is not normal as far as office experience, and recognizes that and thinks, okay, where can we fit you in? And it was just perfect because I was able to kind of practically apply some of those things I was learning in school. And I feel like I've been really challenged, really supported. And like there's opportunity to grow, and that's fun. Like I just feel like that curiosity has been sparked and I can continue to evolve.
Right. Well, and I think it's amazing to pivot too into such, I know they're obviously tied in terms of the skill set and what you're offering, but you're going from skating to a totally different line of work. Like you said, you never had office experience. And I think it's so inspirational too, because so many women I'm finding, especially now, a lot of my friends who've been out of the workforce for so long, they've been parenting for, 8, 10, 12 years. And now they're like, I want to do something. What do I do? How do I do it? Like, what do you say to those people? What do you recommend? Because I find so many women are in that position where it's like they're looking for something. They're looking to pivot, and it's hard to, I think it's just hard to get there,
It's hard to know. And I do think that the idea of, this is controversial. I just said this in a school thing and it didn't go over very well.
Oh, I love it. Let's bring a little controversy to the podcast. Ryan just perked up.
I said something to the effect that the whole idea of chasing only a passion, like I think that's very privileged. Not everyone can just find their passion and then make that their job. And I think probably when you do, then you lose that passion for it in some way. Yeah. Maybe I'm generalizing, but I do think that it's maybe more about finding purpose and meaning, and hopefully there are, there's joy in that pursuit, but it's finding some kind of overarching purpose within which you can carve out kind of a niche or a path. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't feel passionate about something. I just think that I think that's a loaded, I wouldn't know where to start necessarily. And I think that's loaded. So I don't know. Thoughts on that?
I think that's, well, I totally agree with that, because I think to just say, you love baking cakes, go out and be a baker. Well, not everybody can do that. Not everyone can afford to do that. And I also do think sometimes when you pursue something you're super passionate about, it kills the passion, right?
Totally.
So,
yeah. But I do think a big part of my school program right now, which is positive psychology, is built around the elements of PERMA, and that's positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And when you see those different buckets and can find things in your life that foster that kind of growth or, you know, genuine engagement in a path or a project, like that's really, really powerful.
A lot of thinking to do, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to school, like, what's that been like? Like, I've been to school so many times, and I find that every time I go, I have the best intentions, and then I kind of like fizzle out, and I start thinking about other things like passions. Like, maybe I should follow a passion instead of going back to school. So I just see you back at school, and like, what's that like?
That's fair. I mean, and I'll come full circle and say that positive psychology is my passion. So here we go. It's been really rewarding. I think I've been chasing a community a little bit to belong to and to feel that kind of sense of shared experience. So that's one thing that the school has offered. But I feel like the things that I'm learning are integrating so seamlessly into every facet of my life, which is so invigorating to feel that practical application. It is challenging. It's challenging as a mature student to find the structure and to, you know, like the method of studying or, you know.
Well, I'd imagine it'd feel good because you spent so many years of your life doing one thing. So to me, when I think about your situation, it must be nice to be like, okay, that part of my life's over and it's time to focus on this new part of my life and get kind of a fresh start of things you actually want to do. And there's not all this pressure of all these people talking to you and winning gold and having to work on your leg and 7 hours of physiotherapy, just being like, I'm going to be Tessa now and I could focus on what I need to focus on in this next part of my life.
Yeah. And I mean, what an amazing chance that I get to redefine what that looks like. I mean, not many people get to retire at 30 and then do something else. You know, most are 65 and retiring and then trying to find meaning. So yeah, I feel really lucky. I did, just as you were talking there, I realized like how much of a 180 that was. And I went from being obviously very physically active to then sitting at a desk for so long. I herniated a disc in my back, and my physio was like, that's just because you've been sitting. Welcome to the world of work and school. So that's a different, you know, there's different priorities there.
Well, and we spoke about that when you came in. I was like, have you put on skates since you retired? And you said no. And you're like, I haven't really worked out, like, you know, because you don't have to, right? So
yeah, that's been, I mean, I've been trying to unpack that relationship to my body a little bit. I just started working with a trainer and I'm obsessed with her, but I've realized that I dissociated from the connection to my body when I realized I didn't need it to perform for me anymore. It's like I thought of it as an instrument or a separate entity that you know, like a car, I would wash it, I would fuel it, I would, you know, whatever, check the engine, and then it could race. But now it's like it can sit in the garage because I'm not racing. I don't know where this metaphor is going. Sorry. But I felt so disconnected from my body, as if like, I think because maybe that was a coping mechanism when I felt like it was, you know, on display to be criticized or objectified or, you know, in some ways even commoditized, that I shut down from really connecting to it. And that mind-body connection has not been there. So I'm really trying now to find positive emotion in working out instead of just romanticizing willpower, which is what I've done for my whole life.
Right. Well, it's doing it for a totally different reason, which also must feel so liberating. You're like, I am not working out to prep for the Olympics. I'm working out to feel good.
Yeah, it is. It's different. But there are a lot of mental pathways that have been so just ingrained that I have to rewire. And even that, I mean, how lucky am I that I get to do that?
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it's like, you know, 9 lives. It's like it's really crazy. Okay, one last question. What is one thing that you can share with our listeners that they might not know about you? Any weird like interests?
It's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question.
I mean, this is I have said this before, but it's like totally true, and people seem surprised when they get to experience it. I'm so clumsy. I'm not coordinated at all, and I am so clumsy, and I spill things and I trip, and like there's no grace about the way I move around my everyday life. And so maybe I just sort of clung on to Scott, and this is imposter syndrome. Maybe like I was just faking it that whole time. But yeah, I'm very clumsy.
Okay, very surprising.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have something that people would be surprised to know?
What would be surprising about me? I feel like I put a lot out there.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I'm also very clumsy, and so is Sarah. So it's a disaster 24/7, just spilling things, falling, tripping.
Oh, you're both clumsy. That's
Yes,
bad.
Both very clumsy. I am the same way.
Well, I know you have to go, but I have 100 questions for you, and I will refrain from asking them.
I
but
just started. I got
no, that will be another.
Tessa was like, "Are you nervous?" I'm like, "I'm not," but now I'm nervous.
No, that will be another. We'll do another podcast. But I wonder, how did you get to be so comfortable with sharing and being vulnerable and being so open? Because that's the most relatable thing. I love listening to the podcast because of just how authentically you share.
Right.
But I wonder if that was a tough road, or if you at some point just made a really conscious decision to open up. What did that look like?
I think, we've always been open in sharing, especially kind of like recommendations and our journey and motherhood, especially when we were really deep in it with very, very little children. But I never felt really not judged, but maybe I just didn't really care. It was sort of like, I'm okay to put this out there. And I felt like, the more that you put out there, people appreciate it. And, there's always going to be people who have something to say, but I don't really care. I heard this recently, and I really do agree with it, is where is the feedback coming from? Is it coming from someone like friends or family or, people you work with? Like, is it coming from someone who you really value what they're saying? Or is it coming from a troll on Instagram or, a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend? So, I think the more we put out there, just the more positive feedback we got. And so I think that was why we just kept rolling with it, really.
It's almost like that. Is it a 5 and 5 thing? In 5 years, will I spend 5 minutes worrying about this?
Right.
And that also kind of brings things into context. But I mean, having been to your store and learning about your journey and how you've pivoted so many times in either response to the market or maybe your life changing as an entrepreneur, I think that is so inspiring. And the whole brand you've been able to build.
Guys, I'm crying right now.
No, but truly, when
Tessa Virtue's calling me inspiring.
When I told anyone that I was coming on this podcast, like, you have such a loyal following of people who feel they know you. And I think that is such an amazing element to have as a brand and an entity, beyond, the beautiful store and your, the fashion and everything. It's more than that. I think it's a community.
Oh, thank you. Well, yes, that's always honestly been the goal. And I know you said it was like, you went back to school and to feel that community and to feel like, kind of like you have these people who have your back and they have your back, you've got their back. And it does sound cheesy, but I really do love this thing that we've built. And I think there's a lot of love and a lot of support there and a lot of trust. And I think that's very hard to find right now.
Yes.
There's so much noise and there's so much clutter on social and in life. So, I think when you find something that, just makes you feel a part of a bigger thing, a bigger community, then, there's comfort in that.
Mm-hmm.
I am sweating. I know Ryan is like, we gotta wrap it up.
I have to say one thing because
here we go. Everyone's getting a little teary here.
my mom would be upset if I didn't say this because she is your biggest fan. And
what's your mom's name? Let's give her a shout out.
Brenda.
Hi, Brenda.
She loves you.
Your son is lovely.
And I think when I watched, because her like priority was watching you skate. Like that was her favorite thing to do. And she's like so happy that I'm here with you right now. And I think when I look at her and I look at your like skating career, it had nothing to do with you like winning or losing. I think for her, she's still your biggest fan because of just the way you are and how like genuine you always came across, how beautiful you skated. and just like the way you like just represented this country as a human being. And she just loves you so much. So I have to give Brenda a shout out.
Brenda,
Brenda.
thank you so much.
So Ryan, do you want to be my co-host?
Yes, I was just thinking we need a camera facing him too,
I know, I'm
because
working on
you're
it.
the thank you. That
Yes.
really, honestly, that means a lot, and I can't think of a greater compliment.
Yes.
And yeah, Brenda, that's one day I want to hug you, Brenda.
Yes.
I will say, so when I first met you, when you came to the showroom last week, you know, I do think there were a lot of, you know, nerves and everyone was excited, but it was like, what is this person going to be like? You have so many accolades. You've achieved so much. I mean, you are Canadian royalty. So you were so kind, so humble. Like to Ryan's point, I mean, you remembered everyone's name who you met. You said goodbye to everyone by their name. I mean, that is like, you know, little things like that I think people remember. And to Ryan's point, I think there's such just a genuine kindness. There's no ego. You just seem so humble, so aware. And I think after all your successes, to still be, you know, just that person is really, really impressive.
Thank you. That's really nice. You guys make it easy.
Yes. We're just hucking compliments.
This is
at
just
you.
throw
This
compliments
is a
at
total
you.
mutual admiration society
Yeah.
here, and I'm for it. I'm all for it.
Yeah, we're just loving each other here. Okay, well, Tessa, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We really so appreciate it.
Yes.
And
We have to get you on again in the future.
We have to
for
get you
sure.
love
on.
that.
Ryan's going to co-host, and Brenda
Yeah.
will hopefully be
Maybe
here.
Brenda
Yeah.
will be here. Ryan, maybe we interview Annie and Ren.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, God.
Maybe
not a
we
bad
really
idea.
flip the script.
Flip the
Yeah.
tables. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tessa.
Thank you.